Hello, and today we are talking on the Recipients series with the fabulous James Parr. I've been really looking forward to talking with James. James is the recipient of the Social Impact Award in the National Awards for Disability Leadership for 2023. The Social Impact Award is for someone who achieves visibility of disabled people by using mainstream or social media or other digital interfaces. And if we think about James, that sums James up pretty well. I think he's been doing a hell of a lot of that stuff. Let me tell you a little bit about James. James Parr is a Wiradjuri man who is a Melbourne-based right below knee amputee, sharing his story and lived experiences to champion inclusion and representation for the disabled community within mainstream media and fashion industries. James has worked hard to change the sad narrative or sad stigma that having a disability has to a new narrative. He has done this by increased visibility and representation through modelling for, big long list here, folks, Champion, Lululemon, Stella Magazine, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and walking multiple runways for Melbourne Fashion Week, Melbourne Fashion Festival, and Australian Fashion Week. And in checking James's website this morning, there's a couple of others that I've noticed. He's also the Australian Afterpay Fashion Week Changemaker in 2023. And also in 2023, he was GQ's Model of the Year. Fantastic. How could we fit it all in? How are you even managing to do all of that and still have time to eat? I don't know. Oh, that's right. Do models eat?
No.
Welcome, James. It's so good to have you.
Sorry, thank you. I am normally not listening to when someone does my little intro, so that was like nice, but also I'm like, oh, hi.
I
Thank you.
know, I know. I hate the bios. I never listen to my own. It's always dreadful. So
Yeah.
to this, why are you doing why are you doing this? And how and you're taking the approach you're taking. What's that about?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, I acquired my disability. I had cancer. I had an osteosarcoma in my right ankle. And, I think up until then, I lived a very average life. And, I actually had worked in special schools and then I worked in mainstream education at a primary school. And so I, coming out of that, I had already sort of been around people with a disability. And, you would hear, especially what the kids would say, you would hear what they would say, like, oh, like I'm not like other people, or I'm not normal, or these types of things. And to be quite honest, like, you can relate, but you also can't relate because as an able-bodied person, you just don't know. And so, sorry, need to get that cough out. So in inquiring the disability, I instantly noticed how people um, started talking to me differently. Um, it was almost as if I had died, I guess, in a way. Um, I wasn't used to hearing people telling me that they felt sorry for me, that they felt sad for me, and all those types of things. And that was really, what's the word? Sort of perplexing for me because I was like, well, why do you feel sorry for me? Why do you feel sad for me? And, I never felt indifferent. I felt like the exact same person. And so, yeah, it was just very perplexing. And then I obviously sat with it and, I did know why they were doing it. But again, it was perplexing because it's like, why are they saying it? And when I looked back down and when I sat with it and I really thought about it, was really just internalized ableism, and it was the way that we are either represented or misrepresented, or because of the lack of representation in media throughout, that we really come back with that sort of attachment or connotation to having a disability. And I think in terms of modeling, that was something that sort of did fall into my lap. And then I was like, right, now I have something, this is something I can use to hopefully try and make that shift or have a voice. Or there was a couple of things that sort of spoke out to me in that shift. And I remember because I was working at a primary school, I went back and visited the kids still having chemo, but I went back and visited the kids after the amputation. I remember walking into the classroom and all the kids were so hesitant and like so sad and like didn't want to talk to me. But I remember, because I'm an idiot, like I just muck around. The second I made a little bit of a joke and mucked around with them, I could see the shift right in their faces and go, oh, it's still just James. And so there was that. And I remember saying to another friend of mine, and I don't know how we were talking about it, but I said to her, I'm like, would you ever date someone who had a disability? And she said, yes. I'm like, okay, if I asked you that before it happened to me, what would you say? And she was, to be honest, probably no. And so that's when I started sort of realizing how important it was. And I also thought, if I could change one person's mind, maybe I could change other people's mind.
Yes, isn't it? The number of people I've spoken to over the years who said, "Oh, I used to work in disability, or I knew this, and I thought I knew all about it until it happened to me." And
Yeah,
it just changes the whole landscape. Suddenly, I love the way you mentioned internalized ableism, but also just that space of suddenly recognizing that it's just this constant. Oh, I'm not going to say barrage. It was the word I was heading for, but it's just this constant presence of people almost doubting you. It's sort of looking at you
yeah,
like you're going to break, or you poor thing. That stuff, what you call the sad narrative. I really appreciate you
yeah.
using that terminology. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
And it's sort of
Fascinating.
like it instantly devalues you. Like,
Mm.
because you also are like, you think I'm sad, you think my life's sad. Like, that's actually really rude. um,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
it is. Yeah, and look
yeah,
at us. Us,
I know,
you're being model of the year. I'm doing this, and I think
exactly.
it's yeah. Thanks for being sad about us, but yeah, I think we're doing all right.
Yeah.
The kids
Or
are all right.
even when, you know, people come, there is a difference, and I do know, come and tell me I'm inspiration for doing things that aren't actually inspirational. I remember I was going for a run on an oval and this lady was watching me. I'm like, here we go. And, she's come up and she's gone, oh, it's so inspiring to see you doing this. I'm like, babe, there's two other people running on the oval. Go up and talk to them. Don't use me.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah.
Oh goodness. Oh, have you got a special leg for that?
Yeah, I do have a running blade. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yes. So it's a bit exciting, yeah. So what are you currently doing? You kind of moved into this space. You're using modeling as a sort of a vehicle, or using the fashion industry as a kind of vehicle. And what are you currently working on? What are you sort of finding yourself in at the moment?
Yeah, now I think it's still sort of holding in that fashion space. Ugh, I can't talk. In that fashion space, I think when it comes to the media and the fashion industry, especially here in Australia, there's sort of a lot of a lack. So at the moment, I'm sort of just still continuing that. Um, and I have a couple of other little things I am working on the side, which will come out soon. But yeah, I think just really holding that space and being able to sort of share that space with other people.
Mm,
I think
mm.
that's like the most important thing that we can do, because if there's like very authentic representation, that's the easiest way to have representation to help change that narrative, I believe. Because I think if people are just seeing it, sort of happens naturally, and sort of evolves that way. That's my opinion in that. So I think that's still really important. And also, like I as an advocate, I sort of advocate on Instagram. I use social media for that, which also happened very. I did it without realizing I was doing it, and so when I first started getting back into dating after the amputation, people weren't messaging me. They were just messaging me, "What happened to your leg?" Blah blah blah. And so I was being smart, and so if their first question was like, "What happened to your leg?" I would come up with some bizarre story and keep going until they believed it. Just because it was fun. And then I was sharing that on social media, which people loved because it was a bit funny, dark humor, and
Mm.
two, people actually weren't really engaging with it because of dark humor. They were engaging with it because of the message that they were taking away from the other person. And I was like, actually, this is a good way for people to learn because I'm not here telling them what to do. They're just reading it and finding out themselves and sort of learning themselves just in that conversation that does happen.
I mean, they often say that in the, comedy circles, don't they? Is that comedy is sort of a way to introduce tough subjects and to, um,
Yeah.
to do that. And I think, I find myself using humor a lot. I guess a lot of us do. I used to always blame it on all the wild parties I engaged in as a youth. So, that's why I'm like this now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
People go, "Whoa, really?"
Yeah. I
It's
told my
like,
nieces
actually,
and nephews it's because I didn't eat fruit or vegetables.
yes, absolutely. You see, you got to say something. It's
They
funny,
ate
isn't it?
them.
Do you think the fashion industry is kind of shifting a bit? I mean, we've got at the Disability Leadership Institute, we've got some members who are fashion designers, disabled fashion designers. Working on adaptive clothing and stuff like that, and also working inside behind the scenes. So we had a couple of members working on Fashion Week to make it a more kind of inclusive sort of space. Have you noticed a bit of a shift over the last few years? And is there more of an acceptance, or is it still the big novelty, or what are you seeing?
Look, I find every year I'm like, oh, it's getting great. And then there'll be one little thing I'm like, oof. Um, look, I think it's something that is still in infancy stage. We still need to push through. I sort of have a little bit of a struggle with it because even we had fashion festival a couple of weeks ago. I didn't particularly. I wanted to give it a little bit of a backseat, but then I also felt like I had a little bit of pressure in if I took a bit of a backseat, where else would the representation be if I wasn't there? So there's sort of that, but in saying that, I also do recognize, you know, for example, just when it comes to runway, it is. I see two different sides of it because I see how the fashion industry works, and I see that they actually have a lot of models who have a disability that they could use. In saying that, when I go back to seeing how it works, I know that they do make samples and it is hard to fit able-bodied people as well. So I do see that, but then I'm also like, well, no, you should just be making samples that can fit other people. But it, it's sort of like a catch in that, but I still do think we could do better, and there's a lot to do better. I actually had a casting director, I won't say who, um, call me about a show. I was like, oh, I'm a casting director. Don't know how she got my number. Yeah, so the client wanted someone who had a disability in the show, and I was like, you don't say that, like, because then I was like, well, actually, I'm a model who has a disability, and I just got GQ Model of the Year. So, do you want someone with a disability, or are you looking for a model instead of being rude? Because you've just taken away actually my
Mm.
career. Um, And then at the end of the conversation, after I had done that, she's just gone, oh, and do you know anyone in a wheelchair? I'm like, oh, like, are we still like, come on. I was like, I do know models who use a wheelchair. I think you can do a bit of research on your own. I'm not your vehicle for that. Unless you want me to pay me to cast. No, I didn't say that, but yeah,
I
I
say
feel
that.
like, yeah, I was over the conversation. I didn't want to talk to her anymore.
Yeah.
But I do find that it is getting better. I remember about 3 years ago, across one of the fashion weeks, I was probably the only model who had a disability, visual. Um,
Mm.
and then it is getting better. So yeah, yeah, that's just fashion week in general. But when it comes to, I think commercial now, I think it's really increased. I think it's doing very well.
Mm.
Um, Even just the notice in me, I remember when I first started, I was being put in shorts a lot, um, which I don't mind. I think that is important. Um, Whereas now I find myself being the one to be like, can I wear shorts? well, like, I want the leg out. Like, that's the point. So I think, which I think it's great that they're just casting and then not even worrying about it to put me in shorts to make a point of it. That's the best type of representation. It's very authentic. But then for me, I'm like, I want it out, so let's get it out.
Yeah. You're reminding me as you talk, the conversation I had with Natalia Stavisky, who took out the Arts Award
Yeah,
in the National Awards for Disability Leadership. And she was talking a bit like this too. She's a filmmaker,
yeah,
and she was talking in terms of, the presence of the representation of disability, um, and it being sort of a fact of life. I mean, we're simply a fact of life. We're there,
yeah,
so it's not, oh, I need someone who does this. I mean, occasionally the story calls for that.
yeah,
Occasionally, I've recently watched something, a series that was about this blind woman in World War II in this French town, and so that would require a blind person to be cast, clearly.
yes,
But what Natalia was talking about was then, somebody's mother simply happened to be a disabled person. And it's not necessarily mentioned, there's no casting requirement for it. It's just that they simply happened to be that. And, we don't seem to quite have cracked that one yet. We're still working on getting into that space. And it's still this sort of awkward tokenism a lot of the time.
yeah. It is. And then I also like, I don't know. Like, I do think about those things, and if we're gonna, if though it's very authentic to be able to cast someone who was, blind or had low vision. But then I also think, oh, like, what if they needed vision to be able to help the role? But I'm like, no, you're showing a lived experience with someone with blind, they could do it, someone can act it. So it is sort of that catch that I do go in my head. I'm like, no, I'm thinking about it too much. But, or even when I first started, and some people still would say today, oh, like, are you just getting cast because you have a disability? And it's like, who cares?
Yeah, who
And that's the
cares?
point. And all
Exactly.
like, or do you think it's tokenistic because they're just wanting you to be a token? I'm like, well, if I didn't do it, where's the representation? So,
Yeah,
you can't sort of, in a way, you sort of, yeah, yeah, we
yeah.
got to do it to be able to create the change.
It's yeah, it's that one. It's that
Yeah,
one. It is that one. It's
yeah.
what are some of the roadblocks? You talked about that dreadful casting call, but what are some of the barriers or roadblocks that you've come up against where people have taken one look at you or understood the disability thing and just gone, nah, nah. Have you hit
In
into that
career-wise or
space?
personal life?
Oh, well, a bit of both,
Yeah,
that have got in the way of you doing your thing. Yeah.
yeah. Do you know what? When it comes to my career, nothing.
Mm.
The only thing I will say is that sometimes if there's like an audition for, I don't know, let's say TV series, which I'll be the first one to say I'm not a very good actor, anyways, but I'll give it a go. So it's that. But I also look at some of the auditions that do come through, and I'm like, I'm not going to do it because, yes, it's not a disability specific role, but which I like better as well. But I know that they're going to be like, oh, has a prosthetic leg. How, like, that's not part of the storyline, you
Yeah.
know? And so I do get that, but I'm also like, why does it need to be part of the storyline? So
Yeah. Mm.
that's like sometimes, but again, I'm not much of a good actor. I just think about those auditions, and I have done one, and I'm like, I know I'm not going to get it because of that. And I actually, like, in a way, I can see that. I get it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and um, blast them per se, because like it sort of does make sense. Because then you put yourself in the viewer seat and you're watching a show, you are going to be like, oh, what happened to the? Is it part of the character? You know what I mean? But I also think we need to create that change in having to explain those things,
Yeah.
because that then also leads to people where they just walk up to you on the street and be like, what happened to your leg?
Which happens to all of us. Yeah. Well, I don't have a. I've got two legs, but I've got other
Yeah,
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
it
yeah.
happens. It's so
Yeah.
for a lot of us who have what are now termed visible disabilities, or you can tell by looking at us. Yeah, the complete strangers in supermarkets. What happened to you?
I know.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, oh, nothing. I'm having a good day. It's been all right so
Yeah.
far, thanks. Yeah,
No,
it's it's
no,
it's weird, isn't it?
baffling.
Oh, I
I
think.
think when it's
Oh,
my personal life, probably when I stepped back into dating, I just remember there was one that stood out, and I had no photos except for like they all had two legs. So, I was like, and I got it. Just, I lost my leg. Like, someone blocked me once. And that was like, other than that, but I'm like, oh, I don't care. Other than that, there's only been one other thing that stood out to me, and, um, it was a runway, and, um, we do our fittings just the weekend prior, but everything is very meticulously planned out. So
yes.
I remember I went to a fitting, and the stylist was like, "Oh, it's just a plain shirt, but the designer's painting on it." I was like, "Okay." Didn't think anything of it. Didn't think it would be words. Comes to the day of the runway, and I go to my rack, and it's been written on it: "Disabled rights are human rights." Right now, understand the message, but to break it down, this is a runway show. I understand they're trying to make a point and difference with the brand that they were. I do agree with the message, but it's not the right place nor the right time for it. Also, you've just excluded me from everyone else in this show. So the second I step out on the runway in that shirt, people can be like, "That's what he's here for."
Mm.
It's not my message, and it's not what I agree with, because me being on the runway in general is loud enough. I don't need to slam words onto it. And so that was hard for me because we spoke about this just before. I'm a little bit of a people pleaser. And, I had to talk to the stylist about that. And I know it wasn't the stylist's fault. And it was an awkward conversation. And I
Mm.
thought, oh, I'm not really comfy with that. I don't know why I'm in that. Like, it's the designer. And then, look, I was like, yeah, yeah, whatever. And then it's all I thought about while we're getting her makeup done and everything like that. And look, I spoke to my manager. My manager was like, "Want me to call?" I'm like, "No, this is something I need to do." And look, 10 minutes before the show, I'm like, "Yep, no, not wearing it." So, um, yeah, that was the only one that really stood out to me. Other than that, I haven't had too many, too many. Just that, yeah, it really, and that made me to take like a little bit of a step back as well within my career or within myself, because I was like, now I feel um, like I have imposter syndrome because of that shirt.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. And I shouldn't feel like that because, yeah, yeah, I get the shirt, but I'm like, nah, you don't put it on me, and you have a conversation with me about it, because that is, it's not political, but I'm just going to say that it's political, but it's a personal message as well. That's personal to me, so you can't just write that on my shirt without having any conversation.
Think if we're, it doesn't matter who we are, if we're being asked to participate in a political statement, um, I see it as political. That's
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah,
If we're being asked to participate in a statement, a political statement to sell a message, which is what you're doing on a runway, isn't it? You're selling the clothing.
yeah.
Then then should we not be consulted?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Mm.
Like, and like no disrespect to the brand. I think everyone can learn from this. Um, I wouldn't sit here and badmouth them, or this is just what happened. And I think everyone can learn, but also designers were able-bodied.
Ah.
Don't Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't be making something for a different community that you're working, but you're not a part of.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
you
People
know
speaking for us, and yep.
exactly. So.
Yeah.
look, I hope that, again, so much respect for them. I hope that um, they have learned from that and are able to take away from that. I respectfully wouldn't choose to work with them, but I just hope that they have the education, because I did explain it when I spoke to them afterwards.
Mm,
Like, yes, this is my message and what I stand for, but I don't do it like that, because that defeats it, because people aren't going to
mm,
actually pay attention. Whereas if I'm just on the runway, I think that's
mm.
louder. So, yeah, I just hope that they've taken that and they've absorbed it and really use that for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting too, isn't it? Because particularly when we're in the public domain, there's a whole bunch of connection to community and credibility that goes with that,
Mm,
that we can lose so easily by associating ourselves or being associated with an inappropriate message or with, the wrong space.
yeah,
Wrong is, with something that we don't even align with, but somehow we're connected to somehow, and
yeah,
happens, and it it can completely, um, well, shoot you out of the water. It just
100%. Yeah,
takes it's not just your sense of self, and you talked about imposter syndrome, but that whole thing about your credibility with your career and who
mm,
you will work with and who then doesn't want to work with you, and a whole bunch of things can start to happen that can,
mm,
undermine where you're heading and what you've been doing and what you've worked to
yeah,
build. Yeah.
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 Just, yeah, it was
Mm,
baffling to me because the more I thought about it, I'm like, oh my God, I think I would cry on that runway. Like, I'd feel so embarrassed
mm,
because people just like, that's what he's here for. And it's like, no, you've just, to try and include me, you've just taken me out.
yeah.
Like, that does not include me.
Uh,
We can't keep excluding to include.
no, it's yeah, doesn't quite work that way. Yeah.
No.
So what do you reckon, receiving this award, how do you think that will change your work, the difference it will make? And, we've mentioned a couple of other awards that you've snaffled in the last little while as well. It's Sir James is on an award junket at the moment. Um, you know, what's the difference? Why is that a thing? How does it change the minds of some of those people we've just been talking about? Does it? Does it um does it shift the ground? What
Yeah. I think for me personally, it does sort of make me recognize what I do as well, because I think, I never articulate it quite well, but I think when it becomes your job and it is your career, you sort of do lose focus of the message because, you're putting, because now it's business, you know,
yeah.
which I feel like, someone said to me the other day, they're like, I was about to do a job and they're like, why are you doing this job? Like, what does that mean to you? And I said two things. And they're like, okay, doesn't sound very meaningful. And they were like, what about disability representation? I'm like, oh, see, that's something I don't think of because I feel like that's just like the first, like the always there. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So in that, I feel like I'm not actively remembering that because I'm now thinking about business as well. So I think it puts me back into recognizing and realizing what I am doing and reminding myself that, it is creating change and, people are listening and people are wanting to be a part of it and people, you know, want to be at the forefront of that as well. And, but then I think also it's really showing everyone, whether disability or able-bodied, that we hold space and we can do things because we're sort of told that we can't. And I think it sort of really just showcases that and recognizes that and makes it more, not that it isn't accepted, but makes it just more accepted in the way of rather than being devalued in a way, or that
yeah.
we are invaluable and we don't contribute to society. And I think, the way I've tried really hard to sort of use modeling or whatever job I do as again a vessel, I've really wanted to just try and make it very authentic and very sort of quiet in a way.
Mm.
so that it is normal. So, for example, if I was to do a campaign and they were to slap disabled rights to human rights, I'll take it off because me being there is already loud enough. And I think that just creates the representation and shows, makes it more acceptable. But because I think when, again, don't articulate this very well. I think when everything is in your face and people like telling you what to do and things like that, rather than A, being like considerate and educating people, or B, it just being there, I don't think people actually do listen. So I think, yeah, I think that's sort
Mm.
of also holding the space for that and just having the voice elevation. Um,
I love the way you talk about holding space, and it's it's something we've often discussed, in the amongst the DLI members and in the community more broadly over the years that I've participated in, is simply being in the room is often the powerful thing,
oh,
you
exactly.
know, and particularly for those of us who you can tell by looking, we often get really in your face prejudice where people just, the minute they see you, they kind of block. But
Yeah,
being in the room, being part of the conversation, whatever the conversation looks like, for you, that's being on a runway potentially, or one of those sorts of spaces. But simply being there, being part of the conversation, it's that presence, that representation, and we know it changes the entire dynamic. It changes the way the conversation ends up, what
yeah,
it might cover, all of those sorts of things, and it shifts the ground. So this is the sort of the way the ground shifts, rather than, as you say, getting in people's faces, which we also need to do. I mean, that has to happen from time to time, of course. We need
yeah,
to get in people's faces and be a bit thingy about it.
yeah,
But simply being there in that consistent presence, that sense of, oh, if we're not there, actually now people notice that we're not there, and that
exactly.
is a thing too. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? Oh,
yeah,
oh, that's one of those. Yeah, we need a case of wine and a bit of an evening to chat over that one. I think, yeah, that's a
100%.
good.
Yeah. Because it's one that you can just sit there and really keep unpacking. Um,
Yes,
really interesting.
it's
Uh,
fascinating stuff, and
yeah,
I mean, it's in some ways it's partially what these awards are about, is raising the profile, getting out there, saying, hey, we're all over the place, we're doing all this stuff, we're in all
yeah,
these places, and they're not places that you think about, and particularly when you think of the highly intersectional nature of our community as well. We're often in other spaces
yeah,
that are not disability specific, but it's us taking disability into those other spaces as well that
yeah,
that also starts to become a factor. It's huge.
yeah.
It's a big one. So what's next, James? What's on the radar?
Oh, yeah, working on some stuff behind the scenes to sort of hopefully get out in the next year. Just little projects that I've always wanted to do, and I think now will fit quite nicely. So, working on those quietly. I need to get back into, so I'm a triathlete. I need to get back into training. I had an injury, so um, getting back into training. I have Australian Fashion Week in a couple of weeks, so a couple of runways and a couple of jobs there, which will be cool. And look, that's about it for now. Just
Goodness
sort
me,
of,
not off to the Olympics.
uh, I wish. Maybe in a couple of years.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, can't do it all. I sometimes say, overachievers anonymous. We can't do absolutely everything. We have to.
I will do everything. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, yeah, you may. It's I love how we can do that now. We can just build our lives around so many different things. We don't have to follow a single path, and you
exactly.
know, and that's a real. In some ways, it's a privilege of living here and now, I guess. That's
Mm,
exciting, isn't it?
it is, and it's like also looking to the next generation, how different and positive, hopefully, will be for them as well.
Yeah, yeah, you bet. It's something I like to ask everybody before we finish up is, who is a leader you admire and why?
Yeah. Um, Leader I admire is Dylan Alcott. He's a very good friend of mine. So love him, and I just think everything he's doing with his foundation now into He's created the I forget what it's called, but to help representation media as well, and
Yes.
also being someone who is at the forefront of multiple things, and yeah, just being able to champion his voice and have his message shared and heard, and um, he's someone that I really admire when it comes to someone with a disability, but just as a person in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I have a lot of love for him. He is a very big legend.
I'll give him a big sloppy one from me next time you see him. Yeah. Haven't
Oh,
talked to him for a while. Yeah.
want
Good
it?
stuff.
No, I'm kidding.
Uh,
I will though.
yeah. Oh, James Parr, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today and to
Thank
hear
you.
what your work is. And congratulations once again on being the recipient of the Social Impact Award in the 2023 National Awards for
Thank you.
Disability Leadership.
Thank you so much. Is that done? Oh.